my song, O God of all the nations, a song of peace for lands afar and wide. This is my home, the country where my heart is.
Hi, this is Marjohn Love, and this is Marjohn's Musings. And today's show, why look for a cure when the disease is so profitable? I spent a lot of time on the internet looking for new information and new cures for several diseases that I suffer. I found several of the websites had a very slick, glossy look and encouraged me to read wonderful information. And then just at the point where we were getting to the information I went there to find, they asked me for my credit card number. One had doctors on call to answer a question. If you needed a high degree of accuracy and information, it was $43. But once you give that unknown person on the web your credit card number, they then have your credit card number. I didn't feel safe. I felt used. I felt like I was involved in a scam of bait and switch. There was one chiropractor who said he had a cure for thyroid disease. I have hypothyroid disease, Hashimoto's disease. He prescribed coffee enemas with unroasted natural coffee, and then he went on to tell everybody that coffee was sprayed with pesticides, but on his website you could purchase this blonde coffee. When I grew up, that was considered a conflict of interest if you were selling something. The idea of not being able to get adequate information without having to pay quite dearly in some cases for the information made me rue the closing of so many public libraries. In the United States, we have a history of a free and public education, and we have a history of access to information through public libraries, through university libraries, and through the federal government. I went on to the National Institute of Health, NIH.gov, and there was information there. Unfortunately, for type 2 diabetes and for thyroid disease and for another illness that I suffer, here's a warning, folks. Don't go on the internet and look for visuals of this unless you want to get an upset stomach, but it's called lichen sclerosis. When I went to doctors over the years asking them for help with this problem, they told me the condition had an unknown etiology, which is a fancy way to say they didn't know what caused it, and that there was no cure. There were only symptomatic treatments. Treating the symptoms of something that's chronic and progressive is distressing and depressing over the long haul. I recently was very touched and pleased by the efforts of some civic-minded people in the Rockport area who tried to end fluoridation of water. They had studies that showed putting fluoride in water caused a 37% increase in thyroid disease. It's important to understand that thyroid disease hits many more women than it does men. Lichen sclerosis hits many more women than it does men. It seems that if an illness injures women, it's really hard to get funding for research. So I've been online for weeks now trying to come up with hard data to give you on this show. I wasn't able to find the study for the people who wanted people to vote yes to end fluoridation. I couldn't find that study on the internet. That doesn't surprise me because the internet is changing. It started out as a Department of Defense initiative, and it was a way to link university research departments that received federal funding so that they could share information and their results. I don't think there's as much research going on now in 2015 as there was back in 1975 when I first discovered the internet. I feel sad, the people who worked on this Vote Yes campaign, I went to the polls and there were almost 900 people in Rockport who came out to end fluoridation. They were outvoted, but having worked very, very hard for handicapped accessibility and having been a supporter of Edward Kennedy, universal health care, we worked on that for 40 years. If you genuinely believe that fluoride is injuring people, understand that I bet at least 1,000 people were convinced by your program. Don't give up. I did a show last year on chlorine in the water. Chlorine is also a substance that probably should not be in drinking water unless there's a Giardia outbreak or an epidemic of cholera. Chlorine is the only substance that we know which can kill cholera. And because we put it in the water all the time, cholera is becoming chlorine resistant. And as far as I know, we don't have a better silver bullet in our arsenal. Chlorine interrupts the fertility cycle of all sorts of bacteria, but also worms which feed fish, and fish which lay their eggs in the water and fertilize the eggs in the water, and chlorine kills sperm and makes eggs less fertile. So as we watch the fishery die, and it's not just plastic pollution, we chlorinate the water and then we dump our sewage into treatment plants that chlorinate the sewage, and then we dump that into the ocean. I had a book that I bought a while back. It's called Life is Uncertain, Eat Dessert First. And it talks about how to get joy into your life and things that cause you not to have joy in your life. And it typecasts people. One of the people is the delayer. I will be joyous after I get the kids through college. And one is the blamer. How can I enjoy myself when my husband snores? And one is the self-diminisher. That's the person who has negative self-talk. I am a failure. I can't say no. And one of them is the complainer. I can't enjoy my life when the traffic is so bad, it takes the fun out of going anywhere. I could kind of relate to that complainer one. I was at the Blackburn Circle and the lights were flashing, pedestrian and crosswalk, and many times when you see that, the pedestrian has already cleared the crosswalk. But this particular day, there was a young man in the crosswalk. So I slowed down and stopped. And a woman coming out of Gloucester leaned on her horn. I got aggravated with her, like, what am I supposed to do? He's in the crosswalk, lady. Being not as Buddhist as I wish I was, I got a moment of road rage and I flipped her off. So she flipped me off back, practically stood on her horn, hopped the curb at the circle and tried to go around. The young man was in the crosswalk. I had a red light. I have no idea what she expected me to do. I talked to some people afterward and they were like, you know, Blackburn Circle is a really dangerous place. Now I knew that because my son Andrew dated a beautiful young lady. They were together for like 3.5 years. And she was struck trying to cross the street at the Blackburn Circle. Her family lived on the far side of it, and she was up at the convenience store or something, and she tried to cross the street, and someone slammed into her, and she wound up in a back brace for years because of that accident. She was really severely injured. I was pleased when they put in the new lights that told you when a pedestrian was in the crosswalk. But the other day when I was coming down the hill, heading towards Lobsterland, where I go and have wonderful 222 breakfasts and peek out at the beautiful, beautiful marshland and see the wildlife, there was a car, kittywonkers, in the circle, turned 180 degrees and slammed around. I gather that they pulled out and got broadsided, or perhaps they stopped like I did, and someone coming around the circle, assuming that a circle would continue to move, which most circles continue to move, got slammed. And the poor people, a young woman and an older woman, were sitting on the curb crying with their car smashed. A friend of mine said the only way to resolve that issue is to build a pedestrian footbridge. Sounded like a great idea. Where we would get the money for that, that's a whole different issue. Life is uncertain. Eat dessert first. Maybe not. You know, the National Geographic in August of 2013 came out with a thing about sugar. Now, we've talked about sugar in the past. It's an issue for me right now because I've been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And because I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, my doctor put me on Janumet. It's SITAGLIPTIN. Don't ask me to pronounce that. I've never seen the word before. And metformin tablets. It gives me gastric distress. I get headaches from it. It gives me dysentery. But high blood sugar could make me blind, cause circulation problems in my legs and feet that might lead to open sores that won't heal, that can cause gangrene to set in, and cause me to get my feet amputated. Diabetes can lead to blindness. So here are these orange horse pills, you know. Now, like I told you, I have thyroid disease, and part of thyroid disease, I have goiter. I have swellings in my throat that makes it really difficult for me to swallow sometimes. Getting these bad Larrys down is hard. I also have an illness that's hard for me to pronounce. It means that you have dry eye and dry mouth. And again, it's chronic, it's progressive, we don't know why it happens, and all we can do is give you things that will help with the symptoms. So these are xylomelts. They're weird little mints that have a sticky side to them once they get wet, and you tuck them in your cheek, and they have xylitol in them, which is a sugar alcohol, and it makes you produce saliva. They stick there and they kind of, I'm not good with mint, and they have mint in them. They help you with the momentary thing of your tongue stuck to the roof of your mouth and your gums and your cheeks stuck together. But it doesn't do away with the Sjogren's syndrome. Interesting thing about Sjogren's syndrome, you find it a great deal with rheumatoid arthritis. Now, my doctor studies all the time, and he decided to let me try a brand new medication, Farxiga, Farxiga. It's so new that the company gave me my prescription if I would tell them how I was doing on it. I thought this Farxiga was a godsend. Without changing my diet or my exercise, I lost 13 pounds in 5 weeks. The mechanism was that it made you urinate sugar. The ladies out there listening might understand that after a couple of weeks, that started to cause me problems, female problems. I told you that I suffer from lichen sclerosis. It's considered, like Hashimoto's thyroid disease, to be an autoimmune response. Now, my take on autoimmune diseases is that it's a garbage can where they throw things that they don't know what causes it, and they're not going to spend the money to find out. Because when I was on the internet looking, I found out that lichen sclerosis had been tested about these certain bacteria, or maybe it was due to a virus, or maybe this and that. And then they found out that 100%, 100% of people who have lichen sclerosis that had become severe had been on the birth control pill. Oh, gee, so maybe it's not a biological cause. Maybe it's a toxicology cause. The condition causes terrible inflammation and itching. Hashimoto's thyroid disease is a chronic inflammation of the thyroid gland. Now, having taken Premarin, which is sort of a shrunk word for pregnant mare urine-derived hormone replacement, Perhaps the human body recognizes the proteins in the equine hormones and says, you know, this isn't natural, this is wrong, and the tissues become inflamed, swollen, itchy, difficult to heal. When I was newlywed, I found out that my husband's mom used this book as their cookbook, and when she passed away, I inherited this cookbook. Better Home's new cookbook. It's so old at this point, the pages are cracking and it's got all food stains on it. And although my husband says that he grew up on TV dinners, when I make recipes out of here that have check marks and bent over pages, he always lights up because I think his mom actually did cook for him. When we were newlyweds, I got Barbara Swain's Cookery for One or Two because my stepmother didn't teach me how to cook, and my mom died when I was young. And so I learned how to make portion control meals for 2 people with Barbara Swain's Cookery for One or Two. At that time, I was in a size 10 clothing. I looked pretty good. I felt good about myself. Then I got pregnant and I sat at the borderline of what they call gestational diabetes. That's when you become diabetic during pregnancy. I remember having to drink this Coke syrup, like for Coca-Cola. You drank the syrup and then had blood tests every so often over the next several hours to see what your glucose tolerance was. I would get hypoglycemia. Even when I was only 114 pounds, I would get hypoglycemia. But after my Andrew was born, I had this fat that I couldn't get rid of after the pregnancy. And I bought this book. It's called Cellulite. And it was written and published back in 1973. So if you do the math on that, that's 42 years ago. The reason I mention that is one of my fans came up to me at the second glance and said, "Hey, why don't you do a show about cookbooks? There are so many cookbooks. People love cookbooks." I had to think about that for a month because it was a really interesting idea, and I thought it might dovetail really nicely with the problem of thyroid disease that is in your thyroid and diabetes, which is in your pancreas, which is behind your stomach, because your pancreas, among other things, makes insulin, but it also produces the precursors to thyroid stimulating hormone. Now that's kind of interesting because diabetes and thyroid disease then become interconnected. When I first started having trouble with my feet, pain and pins and needles and numbness, and I was really a furry lady. I had to shave 2-3 times a week, and my hair started disappearing at my ankles and moved up my leg until I don't have any hair until near my knees. It was a little frightening, like, what's going on here? Why is my hair not working? I got tested and they did little filament tests to see sensitivity, and then they put blood pressure cuffs on my ankles, and turns out that I have decreased circulation in my legs and my capillary bed under my skin wasn't perfused properly. The blood didn't flow into the capillaries and out through the venules well. And I began to get terrible edema. And I was losing nerve function, and I was losing sensation. My skin was drying. I couldn't perspire. The hair fell out on my legs. Well, those are all symptoms of neuropathy, the beginnings of neuropathy. Neuropathy is a nasty business. But if your blood sugar is good, which mine was at the time, because I tried to follow the cellulite book. So even though this book is like 40 years old, the do-gooders, it's on page 60. Vegetables, a substantial portion eaten raw. Fruit, also raw. Salads with pure natural vegetable oil dressing. Vegetable juices, freshly extracted. Eggs, prepared without butter or fat. So I ate poached eggs for years. Cheese, low-fat varieties. Yogurt without preservatives. Add your own fresh fruit instead of the kind of pre-sweetened yogurt that has jam in it. Milk, preferably skim. Meat, poultry, fish, lean, prepared by broiling or roasting and eaten in moderation. 6 to 8 glasses of water, spaced throughout the day. And dried brewer's yeast. Optional, but highly recommended. Well, optional, some of us get gas from it. The reason that I want to highlight this cellulite book is over the years, like I went to Weight Watchers and I actually lost 29.6 pounds. Start eating smarter and kickstart your weight loss success. And they had interesting ideas. Stay ahead of hunger. Eat out and on the run. It was a guide to what you could eat in a restaurant so you didn't get fat if you went out with your friends. And a thing about start moving more. All that's sound advice. I mean, I'm an occupational therapist and I have a master's degree, part of which is in cardiac rehab, part of it's in biofeedback. Doing the cellulite diet when I was younger and measuring my food and shopping carefully, I wasn't able to control my weight. So I started doing things like power food, Bob Green's Total Makeover. Now, they basically said the same thing about food, but they put in a whole lot of exercise parameters. Now, as an OT, a whole lot of what we do is to get people active doing activities that also exercise their bodies or their minds. Well, I got a membership to the Zone, and I worked out an hour and a half a day, 5 days a week, and I wound up inflamed. And I got tested, and I got diagnosed with fibromyalgia. This is another one of those really nasty ones. But you have these points, and if the therapist or the doctor press these points, they hurt. They're painful points. They're called trigger points. On the outside of the elbow, on the inside of the knee, right near the collarbones, up near the throat, and near your eyebrows, on your forehead, at the base of your skull, in the backs of your shoulders. I learned a lot about how to care for yourself with fibromyalgia. One of the things that's a hallmark of fibromyalgia is exercise intolerance. One of the things that's a hallmark of thyroid disease is cold intolerance. I would exercise as long as I could manage, and I would eat really carefully. And at that time, I was in my 40s, and I could not break 182 pounds. No matter what I did, I could stand on my head. When I went to Weight Watchers, they have you do a journal of every bite of food you put in your mouth. And I did their journal, and it turns out on an average day, I was eating between 1,100 and 1,200 calories. Now at that time, before my discs in my neck and back shrank down, they do when you get older, I was 5'7.5". I was a big girl, tall. I was supposed to be eating 1,500 to 1,800 calories a day. And the fine people at Weight Watchers, who wrote books like Fast and Fabulous Cookbook, demanded that I eat more. I went home and cried. How could I possibly lose weight if I ate more than I was eating when I was already fat? And they explained to me that if you don't eat enough, your body goes into crisis mode and hoards fat and won't give it up. So you could do Suzanne Summers' eat great and lose weight and cook those recipes and do all those exercises and even go out and buy the cute little spandex outfits. And you might lose weight temporarily, but then maybe your stepmother had a stroke, or your father had to go in for bypass surgery, or your son left home for college and suddenly the house was quiet, or you had to put your dear golden retriever down, or your husband joined the army and went off to the war zone of Iraq. Each and every time one of those events would happen in my life, no matter how well-intentioned or diligent I was about losing weight, all the weight I lost on whatever diet I was on, whether it was the Zone, I don't have it with me, I gave it away, Atkins, the South Beach diet. These are my cookbooks, by the way. I didn't get them out of the library. They live at my house. I mean, I studied things like nutritional healings, foods that harm and heal. I got very interested for a while in Dr. Andrew Weil, 8 Weeks to Optimum Health. And he had another book. It was Eating Well for Optimum Health. Because when you have a chronic, progressive illness of unknown etiology, whether you go to your regular doctor or the endocrinologist or the gynecologist or whoever, they'll tell you, eat better and exercise more. Ultrametabolism. This is one from Britain, The Slimmer's Year. healthy heart one dish meals. How about light cooking for two? Now they know that if you're eating rabbit food and cottage cheese or boneless, skinless chicken breast and broccoli or shrimp and spinach, that you get to the point where you start to crave some carbohydrates. So there's books out, step by step, 50 low-calorie desserts. Some of these are actually tasty. Step by step, 50 low-calorie desserts. But they're basically based on fresh fruit. I don't know how many of you remember Richard Simmons. I thought he was a cutie, you know, gay guy in spandex, sweating to the oldies. I used to wear, back in the days of cassette tapes, I'd wear headphones because the little earbuds hadn't happened yet, and I would jog and dance to the oldies in my living room because his theory was if you could sweat, you could lose weight. I actually found Richard Simmons told the truth. If you could exercise until you sweat, you did, you lost some weight. He got famous. He got his own television show. And some of the things he came up with was, this one here is Sweetie Pie, the Richard Simmons private collection of dazzling desserts. Not all of these are Weight Watcher approved, and they're not all low calorie. And his take on that is, you know, have a little chocolate mousse. It's, for him, portion control. So Williams and Sonoma came out with healthy desserts. Again, if you look at it, the desserts are fruit-based. I had this cookbook that I was using, and I brought it into my doctor. And he's like, oh my goodness, don't eat from that. You're going to make yourself diabetic. Why? Because it had a whole lot of fruit in it. Some of these health programs, you know, that I got involved in talked about accelerated fat burning and the infinite menu plan. Thyroid disease has a hallmark symptom of intolerance to cold. Why? Because if you have thyroid disease and you get cold, even if you're taking prescription medication every day, your body doesn't send out the signal from your thyroid gland, burn fat to make heat. You can't do it. You don't do it. I don't think the obesity related to thyroid disease and diabetes, which I found out through a whole lot of research, are connected to one another. If you have neuropathy in your legs and you're diagnosed with thyroid disease, they say, oh, it's pseudo-neuropathy. There's nothing pseudo about it. It's the same neuropathy diabetics get. And this lichen sclerosis that can ruin your life because it's so painful. Every day of my life, I hurt, I'm in pain. It's so painful. And the cure for that is unavailable, and the treatment is steroid creams that give you temporary relief and make the skin thinner and more fragile, so that over time they make the condition worse. That there was this huge high correlation between lichen sclerosis and thyroid disease. Geez, why don't we know that? Because we go to the gynecologist for the one and we go to the endocrinologist for the other, and they don't talk to one another. The latest fad that came up maybe 20 years ago was don't eat 3 meals a day, which is what we were told. Eat 5 to 6 little meals, the 400-calorie fix. All these things assume that you can convert fat to energy. If you can't burn fat, if your Krebs cycle is defective and you can't burn fat, what happens is one day you get on the scale and you're 250 pounds. I'm 120 pounds overweight, and I'm getting congestive heart failure problems because nobody's figured out how to get my thyroid to work again. And on the internet it says people should take Synthroid. Well, I did for 6 years, gave me all sorts of side effects, and eventually it stopped working. I had to go on the pig product that was developed in the 1950s. Armor pig processing plants that make ham took the thyroids of pigs and made a product that some people like me who cannot take Synthroid because we can't convert the T4 to T3. We can't do it. And we get toxic, we get too much thyroid hormone that we can't use because one is the storage thyroid hormone and the other is the active thyroid hormone. The only way I can get active thyroid hormone is from pig product. But it's like pregnant mare urine. If you put pig thyroid hormone into your body, your thyroid gland gets attacked because that's not a human protein. That's not a human hormone. I even went so far as to get this wonderful book by a Dr. Liu, Chinese Natural Cures. I'm going to show you a chart that I got when Andrew was an infant, so maybe 1983. What it does is it teaches you what types of natural cures are available in the form of herbs and seeds and foods. That's what this does. It's from China and it's ancient Chinese medicine. It was more than I could comprehend. It had a whole different theoretical basis, and it prescribes things like duck eggs. I haven't seen a duck egg in a supermarket since my grandmother died. So this chart is titled Herbs and Ailment Cross-Reference Chart. It was distributed by the United Communications in Woodmere, New York, P.O. Box 320. When I was first studying herbs, it was so deep of a subject and so complex that it really helped me to have a chart like this. And it came with this interesting little ruler. And the ruler, you line it up along the top, and suppose what you're dealing with is aches and pains. You slide the ruler down, and when you get to a triangle, you come over and you find that black cohosh is good for aches and pains. We were talking a lot about diabetes. So if you line up on diabetes, anywhere that there's a triangle, it showed you what they felt was helpful and useful in diabetes. A lot of people that have menstrual problems have anxiety issues, and they recommended chamomile. You could make chamomile tea. None of these herbs, and there's dozens and dozens of them, was a cure. So it was nice to be able to utilize the little ruler, Herbcraft and Herblore, that was brought down to us through the centuries. If you were having difficulty with your circulation, they recommended bayberry. In Dr. Henry Liu's book from China, with all the Chinese medicines, some of the things were not available here. The ideas, the way to look at the body was different. So I wanted to show you that there was an American way with American herbs and seeds that you could do a naturopathic healing. Not necessarily a cure, but a healing. I'm not the only person that dieted and then gained the weight back. So books came out called Stop Dieting and Lose Weight. This one is by Anne Egan and Regina Rangans. There's another one, Stop Dieting and Lose Weight Cookbook by Mary Jo Plutt. Okay, P-L-U-T-T. Same exact title almost, okay? Why? Because people did these diets. They lost weight initially, and then the weight came back, and when it did, their weight went up by a percentage of what they lost. My doctor explained to me that that was a famine survival mechanism. That if you eat less than you need, your body thinks you're in semi-starvation, and it affects your thyroid and turns down your metabolism so that you can survive on less food. So like I said, I went to Weight Watchers and they said, you need to eat more. I did. And I lost weight. Unfortunately, the food that they want you to eat is really hard to stick to. When you live in America and you're surrounded by goodies. I've told you before, I have a sugar addiction. My doctor thinks that I'm addicted to sugar because I'm chronically hypoglycemic. I don't have enough sugar in my blood. And so my brain sends out, eat sweets, I need sugar. Diabetes is a disease of the inability to digest and metabolize sugar. It can make you senile. It can make you blind. It affects your heart and your kidneys. It can cause you to be amputated. It's now considered one of the epidemics of this country. And I've talked to you before about the fact that when you go to a supermarket, they put sugar in 87% of all the products in the supermarket. Dr. Lufkin says there are so many names for sugar you don't know them all. This is the man that did the movie Fed Up that I recommended to you. When I was exercising vigorously and I got the fibromyalgia, one of the things that helped me was the Women's Comfort Book. It's produced by Harper in San Francisco, and it was written by Jennifer Loudon. It's ways to cope with chronic pain, low self-esteem that comes from not looking the way you wish you did. This isn't really a new phenomena. You know, Mary Barker Eddy, The Keys to Science and Health from the Scriptures, she was dealing with spiritual ways to keep yourself healthy. And you don't have to be Christian to be interested in this. Edgar Cayce did a handbook for health through drugless therapy. Oh my goodness, how many years ago now? This one was Macmillan in New York, and it was copyrighted in 1975. So it's 40 years old. And this isn't Christian. Edgar Cayce was a parapsychologist. I tried going vegetarian for a while. You know, I thought, oh, okay, the Buddha says, you know, if you can't help sentient beings, try not to hurt them. Well, I wound up gaining a lot of weight, and my doctor said, but you need protein. You're trying to eat carbs. Every vegetable, every fruit, and every grain is a carbohydrate. So there's books now on how to avoid carbs and healthy carbs versus unhealthy carbs. I think it's like, it's enough to make you crazy. My writing group leader for the Mensa writing group that meets up at the 99 up in Haverhill, she wrote 3 cookbooks: microwave low-carb recipes, carb charts, low-carb reference, and quick, no-cook, low-carb recipes. These are by Lisa Shea. Some of these are actually tasty. They're not bad. But if you have a metabolic disorder, one that affects your mesenchymal tissue, so like I told you about the Sjogren's, right? It gives you dry eyes and dry mouth. That's pink tissue, the inside lining of your eyes and the inside of your mouth and throat. So you don't get cataracts, or to slow down the development of cataracts, you can get eye drops, Sustain eye drops, and you put the eye drops in. Problem, if you're not making tears, oily tears, because you have a problem metabolizing fat going in and getting out. You don't make oily tears. You have difficulty with your mucous membranes all the way through your digestive tract. So you can wind up with irritable bowel syndrome, chronic, idiopathic. We don't know the cause. There is no cure. Try to eat better, exercise more. If I sound fed up about it, and got myself a glucometer. And it has test strips. And you take a little stiletto and you puncture yourself, and you take your test strip and you take the blood and you put it in the meter. When I was working at nursing homes back in the 70s, they had these, and this One Touch Ultra, is consumer rated the absolute best one on the market. In the old days, they were big clunky machines, but the test strips came in a bottle with 100 or 250 test strips for $3. And the electronics were inside the machine. The test strips for the One Touch have the electronics on the strip. They're $40 a month. Why look for a cure when the disease is so profitable? Well, because it's morally right to look for a cure. Maybe if the Environmental Protection Agency made food producers stop adding so many types of corn syrup and high fructose corn syrup and maltose, dextrose, galactose, lactose, all the different sugars. Dr. Lufkin says there's so many sugars you don't know the names of them all. Maybe if the EPA said, this is causing an epidemic of chronic, painful, horrible illness in our country, stop doing it. And sodium. Don't give everybody high blood pressure to extend the shelf life of your product. And maybe if doctors talk to one another, you need to talk to one another. Lichen sclerosis is horrible. So is diabetic retinopathy. Buck up and do the right thing, even if it isn't profitable. That's all for today. This is Marjohn, and this has been Marjohn's Musings.